emergency for the first time in about...
This is Jim, and,
Receiving this message. We are Ken Jennings and John Roderick. We speak to you from our present, which we can only assume is your distant past, the turbulent time that was the early 21st century.
Fearing the great cataclysm that will surely befall our civilization, we began this monumental reference of strange and obscure human knowledge. These recordings represent our attempt to compile and preserve wonders and esoterica that would otherwise be lost.
So whether you're listening from an advanced civilization or have just reinvented the technology to decrypt our transmissions, this is our legacy to you.
This is our time capsule. This is the Omnibus.
You have accessed entry 522.MT0634, certificate number 46598. Genoan Insurance.
I sell insurance.
What a shock.
Do you have life insurance? Because if you do, you could always use a little more. Am I right or am I right or am I right? Right.
I'm genuinely interested.
I'm guessing that you, as a modern American person, have lots of insurance policies on things.
It seems like a grown-up should. Like you should have a drawer of your desk full of your various policies.
Yeah, right, that are all on pieces of paper that look like the bill from I Am a Bill in Schoolhouse Rock.
Some kinds of seals.
Have a seal with a little ribbon on it.
Silver stickers. You
have to have car insurance.
I do have car insurance.
You have to have house insurance.
You have to have health insurance.
Right.
Under the Affordable Care Act, because our healthcare system is still a disaster.
That's true. Although futurelings right now are living in a world where Band-Aids are free, in our world, Band-Aids cost $1,000.
That's right. Isn't that amazing? $1,000 per Band-Aid.
Yeah. Thank God you only have to pay a copay of $500.
People just skin their knees and then they just bleed out because they can't afford a Band-Aid, and that's why Bernie's going to win.
So you got car, house, and health insurance.
What else is there? I do have life insurance.
Okay.
I have a life insurance policy.
That's interesting.
Uh-huh.
That's definitely like a grown-up thing. I don't have a life insurance policy because I feel like if I died, it would only benefit all the people around me.
That's how yours would work. Mm-hmm. They would collect money from your next of kin if you died because they've got so much more disposable income now. What other kinds of insurance are there?
Well, what are the areas?
I've actually taken out one of those. You know how celebrities get, like Jimmy Page got his fingers insured?
Oh, yeah.
Sid Charisse got
your button finger
got
insured?
My buzzer thumb insured, yes.
Is that right?
If anything were to happen to my right thumb, like if it went through a combine, the Amalgamated Mutual Company of Indiana would have to pay me 10 million simoleons.
Here's a little Jeopardy query. If you had to do the buzzer with your left hand, how much would that affect your gameplay?
Oh, I'm left-handed. I would be so much better.
Wait a minute, you're left-handed?
Yeah, I've been handicapping myself.
Have I been sitting here across from you this whole time and you've been writing with your left hand and I didn't notice it?
Notice what a freak show is going on right in front of you?
My mom is left-handed.
It's not that weird. It's got to be something like
a little weird.
10 to 15% of Americans.
So if your left hand was chopped off and you had to click the buzzer with your right hand, how much would that affect your reflex?
That's what I'm telling you. I do, in fact, click the buzzer with my right hand.
Oh, my God. This story just gets worse and worse.
I use my offhand to buzz.
Why?
To try to give the other fella a chance.
You're the worst.
No, that is not true.
Are you ambidextrous?
Many left-handed people are ambidextrous to some degree, and I'm not sure whether that's just because of how brain chemistry works or because if you grow up in a right-handed world, you have to assimilate in a way that right-handed people do not.
Mm-hmm. You're code switching?
For your benefit,
with
John.
Your hand, yeah.
I'm thumb switching. Mm-hmm. I believe, in my case, I know that many of the tasks I do right-handed, it's just because I learned that way from a right-handed person.
Oh, I see.
For example, I throw a Frisbee right-handed because that's how my dad showed me.
Because God invented the Frisbee to be thrown right-handed.
Right. We could not afford a left-handed Frisbee because those orthopedic left-handed Frisbees cost $1,000.
Do you use scissors
Bernie
with
is not
your left or
president
right hand? Scissors.
I use right-handed scissors, again, because they never had the lefty one in the Like the school never had enough of the lefty kind. So.
Right.
And computer mouse, I learned to do right-handed because if you grew up in a right-handed home, you can't just keep swapping. I grew up in the age of the corded mouse.
Right.
So you just can't keep swapping to the other side of the keyboard.
The Age of the Corded Mouse, one of the all-time great novels of our generation.
My favorite Death Cab for Cutie song.
That's interesting. You know, Jason Finn, the drummer of the Presidents of the USA, plays on a right-handed kit, but he plays open-handed rather than cross, like a typical drummer will play the hi-hat across the snare.
With his right hand.
And Jason plays open because he's left-handed.
There was, who's the guitar? Did Jimi Hendrix play a right-handed guitar just strung backwards, I think?
Upside down. He played it
upside down, right, exactly.
And Kurt Cobain did that too.
So you got to assimilate because that's what the man wants you to do. And so because I kind of got used to clicking left-handed and playing right-handed and playing video games right-handed, I click on Jeopardy.
Interesting.
Right-handed.
Huh.
But that does not answer the question about what kind of insurance I have.
Another thing that makes you a special flower.
A super freak show.
Well, when you think about it, what are the things where you take on risk and you would like to mitigate that risk somewhat, share that risk among other people? Ultimately, insurance is a thing that evolved over time because people felt like they were taking risks that if they lost the gamble,
if the ship sunk,
they were busted. And they wanted to share that risk among a larger pool of people.
I do this when I go out to eat. I have a hard time with a big menu, trying to narrow down what do I actually want. I kind of get paralysis of choice. So often I will go in with some people at the table. I'll say, hey, I'm not sure if I should get the omelet or the pancakes. What if I get the omelet and you get the pancakes and then we can split them?
Oh, and the other person's like, I didn't want an omelet or a pancake. And you're like, no.
The other person's like, I'm not even at your table, sir.
You're going to get the pancakes.
What are you doing? So yeah, I feel like I do things like that to mitigate risk.
We do it all the time. I do it in restaurants too, except in the choosing of restaurants. Where should we go to eat? Oh, I don't know. We could go to Thai food or French food. And I do that as a way of of removing some of the risk of having chosen the restaurant and it turns out the restaurantt is bad.
My wife and I are both so accommodating that we have worked out a system where by picking a restaurant, one of us narrows down from infinity restaurants to say 3 to 5 and the other person narrows down to 1.
Oh, narrows it down to 1. How is that different from choosing?
The other person chooses from the list of 3 to 5.
I see. That's not bad.
I think we can all agree that 1 restaurants would be a narrower selection than 3 to 5.
I mean, I was thinking that then the next person had to narrow it down to 2 and then you would cast lots.
We just pick a very narrow restaurant, one of those Seattle diners that's kind of boxcar style.
It's always intriguing to me how banking and insurance arise out of a kind of natural process of expanding the scope of trade and expanding the desire to make a profit. And
because you just don't need it if you're growing your own supply. If you
grow your own.
Growing my own sorghum. If you're just sitting in your thatched cottage eating nothing but the sorghum and the millet that you brought in last harvest.
Right.
What do you need insurance for?
But even if you're trading directly with someone, here's some sorghum, can I have some of your millet? There's not a ton of risk there. There is a risk that someone's going to give you some subpar,
some bad millet.
Yeah, bad millet. You're gonna get written about for your Persian exploits for selling bad metal. You're gonna get
bad ingots.
Yeah, but the risk is fairly personal at those early levels. But as trade expands, and particularly when you are trading with, or you're trading over long distances, or where you're trading with people you don't know, or
you're just gonna have to send a bunch of gold out on a camel and hope that cardamom comes back.
That's right. There ends up being a lot of risk, and depending on how much you have invested in any one given transaction, you every time you take the risk of being wiped out or ruined.
And to be fair, that was true in an agrarian life as well. One bad weather season or whatever. But in that case, you had a solution. You would just die.
You would die.
All those people would just die if the sorghum didn't come in.
But the earliest forms of insurance were, I think insurance that we could all kind of recognize, and you and I described it a little bit with the restaurant thing, but the first form of insurance is sort of paying fealty to your king by bringing him a sacrificial lamb. You're insuring yourself against trouble in the future by by making yourself a friend of the court, or by saying a good word about your neighbor. All of these are in different ways used as insurance against future risk.
I mean, by that definition, any kind of religious belief is insurance as well.
That's right. Yeah.
I've got my king. I think to this day, a common kind of Christian joke is to refer to good behavior, the good Christian life, as fire insurance.
Fire insurance. Oh, look at that.
Because your Jewish neighbor is going to be burning.
Lol. But also, concepts of like shared aid within a community. If one person's house burns down, it behooves the whole village to chip in to rebuild a house for your neighbor, rather than to let that neighbor's house burn down and everybody closes their door and pulls the shades down.
People back then had no problem realizing that there's a communitarian, so there's a strength that will only come from looking out for each other.
Right.
Whereas today, a lot of people are like, well, why should I get health insurance? I'm not sick. Why should I pay for her health insurance? Well, because if she doesn't, she's going to start breathing coronavirus on you, sir.
That's right. Right. Or she's going to put up a tent in your yard and start digging through your trash, which is, it's a lot easier just to help your neighbor. But then again, who cares? It's all going to hell.
Is that your rebuttal? Is that your rebuttal to Christianity?
Yeah, who cares?
John, help your neighbor. Yeah, but on the other hand, what a hassle.
As things get more sophisticated, though, you end up not feeling like the people that live 4 blocks away are your neighbors, or at least not so much that you're going to help rebuild their barn after it burns. And it's somewhat at the foundation of the rise of guilds and churches and community organizations that bind people together. A lot of those they originally started as forms of either mutual aid or shared risk.
When it becomes harder to see the direct survival connection between groups of people.
Right.
Let's formalize it.
You identify as a Mason, for instance, the other people that share your trade, or you join any church really is part of the idea of a church is that you have shared values, and then you come to one another's aid. And that is an organic form of insurance that isn't mercantile necessarily, but it is guarding against the tremendous risk that comes into any human being.
The vicissitudes of life, just being born.
The vicissitudes of life. Thank you. But as early as the Code of Hammurabi, there started to be a kind of institutionalized idea, and insurance and banking or money lending go sort of hand in hand. And as the one, banking and loaning money are another thing that are kind of nascent in any exchange. But as money becomes real, as money becomes representative of material wealth, then there's almost immediately an instinct or a desire, a market for money being loaned. But banks per se didn't really formally exist until the Middle Ages. Most money lending was part of a capitalist exchange. Someone would say, I want to take this millet and put it on a boat and take it to sell it over here. And someone else would say, I'll pay you, I'll enter into a partnership with you, basically. I'll put up the money and then directly reap a percentage of the profits from your...
In millet, probably.
In millet, or in whatever you're trading, in frankincense or whatever you're trading that millet for. And a lot of the early prohibitions on usury that actually kind of are throughout the Abrahamic religions, come as a result of some discomfort at people profiteering off of one another, taking advantage of their misfortunes. You know, the Torah pretty clearly says, like, you cannot charge interest on loans to other Jews, but you're somewhat obligated to charge interest on loans to people that aren't Jews. And then in the Quran, there's a retributive passage that says, since the Jews are loaning are charging interest on us, you know, we're going to prohibit charging interest on anyone except it doesn't. We can do it to the Jews. The Quran does not say that you can charge interest to Jews. But the definition of what constitutes usury, which is loaning money in exchange for a percentage fee,
interest, essentially,
as opposed to investing money in a proposition and then reaping a profit. That distinction is sort of at the core of where the idea of insurance comes from.
It's a weird distinction. Does it seem uncharitable that you would profit from someone else's misfortune? Is that the idea?
Well,
profiting off someone else's fortune is good. They're going to have something to share.
I think that the idea, what usury is just profiting off of the use of your money.
But don't we need that?
Well, now we do. I mean, now our whole economic system and political system is piled up on these pilings of interest loans.
I'm wondering what the original objection would have been. Is it a rich get richer problem? Why should somebody with money have a way to get more without doing much?
Well, I think it is a moral objection to the idea that you are not, you're really not risking anything but money.
And not doing any work.
You're not doing any work, right? It's the money that's doing the work, and you are just sort of sitting on top of your pile of money. Whereas,
so it's a corrective to our problem with billionaire capitalism today.
Right. We should go back to the Commenda contract, which was so this actually came up during the medieval period that our story kind of really takes shape. It was Pope Gregory IX actually prohibited, issued a kind of edict against insurance for money, and developed what's called the Commenda contract, which was a form of, again, insisting that if you were going to invest money and charge interest, that in a financial proposition, that you needed to do so as a owner. The capitalist could loan money to a venture, but the capitalist needed to bear the risk also by being, like a co-conspirator.
And that essentially bans insurance, right? Because if you have insurance, or is that right? Or does it lead to the insurance industry?
Well, so the era after the Crusades, which is a period that we've discussed quite extensively on this show, one of the side effects of the Crusades was that all of that energy that Europe was pouring into, waging these wars in the Levant and in the East, what it did was open up tremendous trade routes to and from the Levant and the East. It, although Byzantium was, kind of degraded by the Crusades, we did now have tremendous shipping resources, like paths were laid, relationships were built. And so in the period after the Crusades, the world of trade really expanded, and it was based largely out of northern Italy. The financial world was concentrated in Florence and Genoa, Venice,
yeah.
Because these were the parts of the world that a lot of the shipping.
They were seafaring peoples.
They were seafaring peoples, but also these were regions where the sort of town fair was a gathering place for people, for these seafaring merchants to come exchange goods and services. Like there were institutions in medieval Europe that really promoted the idea of capitalist exchange. And one of them was the tradition of a kind of market town. Those naturally, what had formerly been kind of regional little markets sort of naturally facilitated bigger marketplaces as more goods were coming in from farther away.
Sure. It's the new mall or the Walmart coming in and shutting down the little tiny mom and pop stalls.
And those larger shipping interests and as trade expanded and involved long sea voyages, and in particular transactions with people far, far away in languages you don't understand for goods you kind of maybe don't even really grok, the risk became exponentially higher, right? If you put all of your money into a shipment of amber and set it off on a boat to Alexandria, the opportunity for that boat to disappear, either by sinking or through piracy. Or the captain just decides he's going to turn. He's
into amber now.
Yeah, and sail to Marrakesh rather than continue on his way. So although the opportunity for amazing trade fortunes expanded, there was also so much more risk, and the need to mitigate that risk, ameliorate it, basically resulted in the devising of schemes for shared risk. And what that often meant was that different merchants the easiest one was to split up your shipment of amber across 4 ships and say, I'm sending 4 ships to Alexandria, and at least 2 of them hopefully will make it. If all 4 do, it's a windfall. But then the reverse engineering of that is to split up the ownership of one ship among 4 people.
Sure. It makes sense. What's going to be in the other 3/4 of the other ship?
Right.
Let's make this more efficient.
But also then, once you start to do that, then you enter into a relationship where there are 5 merchants and they have 5 ships, and each one is sort of, spreading their goods around. These syndicates start to blur, because what they're doing is they're lending money, so it's a proto sort of banking, but they're also insuring their investments against losses. So it's a kind of proto insurance. And the relationship between banking and insurance even now is uncomfortably close sometimes.
And right now there's no central broker saying, hey, I want to match up risk takers with investors and take a cut. Like right now, it's just symmetry between people, but I'm sure that happens very soon.
It does.
You're going to want to outsource it to some guy who's like, oh, I know who wants some amber.
Yeah, and in Florence in particular, right there, sort of on the Ponte Vecchio, right in the center of what we think of as medieval Florence, there becomes a kind of marketplace, and originally a street market, of people who are trying to, or who are funding expeditions and offering in exchange for a premium of ownership. You could get an investment to go off on an adventure, and pretty quickly merchants realize that they don't. Up until this point, if you sent a ship out with a load of grain, presumably you went with the ship. You were the merchant. You went and made the trade.
Oh, right.
But it was
you don't have an office,
right? It was during this period that merchants started to realize that they could send ships out with contracted agents, And
the white collar job is invented.
And pretty soon they're running, they're running an office, they're running a shipping company.
I'll sit in the second story room with a view of the Arno.
And people realized also, rather than take a shipment of grain, if I just took a shipment of seeds and, and went to a far off place and started a seed brokerage or or planted the seeds and then, you're entering into
colonialism is created,
right,
basically.
a much larger capitalist enterprise.
Yeah.
But that notion started to take a sort of formal shape. The first contract, the first actual insurance contract that we have that we can refer to. There's some within the community of
insurance historians.
There's some argument.
Can you introduce me to these guys sometime? I mean, they must be a hoot.
For a long time, insurance historians all agreed that the first insurance contract was written in Genoa in 1347. There are some revanchists who
you can always find the precursor, right?
Who claim that it was written in Pisa in 1343.
Everybody wants the
4 years
milestone.
earlier. Yeah.
So basically you get people fighting over, what counts as a 1347. So there is still an document remaining.
Yeah, and this was an incredibly, we call it the Renaissance or the Proto-Renaissance. But what was happening was in opening up all those markets in Asia Minor, there was also all this discovery of the great wealth of antiquity, all of the books that were, and the astronomy that was preserved by the Arabs, and the wealth of Greek art.
It's funny how that becomes a side effect to somebody trying to make a buck on myrrh.
Right, but it increased the it just increased the kind of the energy that was located not just in northern Italy, but in that whole world of exchange. Like, wow, right? It's I sent out a bunch of grain, but the guy came back with all these fantastic statues that he stole from some pit.
It starts to align wealth with intellectual sophistication. You show that you have a certain place in the community by virtue of the nice art you have, the scientific instruments you own. Before, I'm guessing there was not such an alignment between who had the money, which would just be some political class, and who had the scientific knowledge, which would just be a bunch of weirdos looking at the shadows of sticks out in the desert.
Yeah, all of knowledge was the province of the priests, right? And they were they were mocked for their navel gazing,
their erudition.
Yeah, right, sitting there illuminating manuscripts. But yeah, all of a sudden you could have the mechanism, you could have the beautiful art, but the beautiful science. That's right. The medieval marketplace then opened up the idea of access to beautiful things to a middle class.
Right.
And now all of a sudden, if you were...
Middle class just meaning somebody who hadn't been born into aristocracy, but now suddenly has some agency in life.
Has money because they are part of this trade mechanism, right? Where they take some money, they buy something, they trade it to someone else. Pretty soon they've doubled their money, and if you're engaged in the trade of exotic spice or of fantastical materials, right? You want to be part of that, have some ownership in it yourself. So you see this burgeoning idea of disposable income, luxury goods, which hadn't previously existed. So as markets expanded, the variety of risks expanded, and insurance started to be a separate financial service. And this era in medieval northern Italy is where banks as businesses started, rather than money that was being sort of invested and shared, profits being shared among people that were invested in certain enterprises. the rules about usury started to change, and formal banking became a banking where money was being loaned at interest.
It occurs to me that you need an educated middle class for some of these institutions to form, because you can't have insurance without somebody doing some kind of math, like whatever the early equivalent of actuarial tables is. Like that business is only a success if somebody can figure out how to make the numbers work.
Right.
And so, the beginning of a self-educated but now with disposable income middle class makes that possible. Before, maybe the priests could have made the numbers work, but they weren't going to run an insurance agency.
Right, and they wouldn't have had the interest, or they're
no pun intended.
Right. There does at a certain point need to be enough of a market that there's this extra money.
Yeah.
And that most insurance companies were initially syndicates because and banks were too, because there wasn't any one place where there was that much money that they could survive one massive claim. And so insurance companies were things that you could invest in as a wealthy person.
It's parallel. Everybody chips in.
And so it's a way, and very much like banking, it's a way that you take your money and get a return on it.
I like how the rich have realized, this is very precarious. We only get this status by, let's look after each other. Like, well, it's in my interest for Hugo here not to lose his ships as well. He'll look after mine. The real enemy is the poor.
And the idea of banks as a syndicate, it's essentially an insurance company, right? You're putting money, you're loaning money to somebody, and you hope their ship doesn't sink. You hope they don't fail. So they're two sides of the same impulse. But as trade expanded to become, in some ways, like the major human enterprise, as the Renaissance progressed in the Enlightenment, cities were formed no longer around sort of subsistence trade or just mercantile, or I'm sorry, like the basic level of like I have this
a market square
direct trade, right?
Yeah.
To being almost entirely a capitalist marketplace where really
you're trading money back and forth.
You're trading
the
money.
Actual transactions are happening on some plantation or dock far away.
Suddenly, the need for insurance really expands, and a major part of this was it was concomitant with the slave trade.
Oh, interesting.
The risk of the slave trade to the capitalists.
Is it because the lifetime labor of a human being is such an extraordinary asset, or is it because of the width of the ocean now involved, or both?
Well, right, and just the attrition of carrying live humans.
I guess that's true.
Some are gonna die, and they could all die. And
I like how the real problem with that is how do we insure it?
How do we insure it?
Oh, that's awful.
And so, so one of the most famous insurance companies, and we'll get to in a second that it isn't actually really a company, but Lloyd's of London began at a coffee shop in London in the mid 1600s, and the coffee shop was called Lloyd's, and a guy named Lloyd started this place. And
hey, I'm Lloyd. Do you want a muffin with that?
And so it became a place. It was kind of there, located in the city of London, the old city. Mm-hmm. It became a place where ship captains and shipping interests, just guys in waistcoats, went for coffee. And in the process of standing around, there was a lot of talk about shipping, and then people started to come there with shipping news.
And people started bringing their laptops.
And Lloyd erected a podium so the guys could stand up and talk about what was new and exciting in the shipping business.
So he could have had poetry slam night, but instead
it became like his little shipping cafe. And so it became a place where, because shipping was still sort of the most dangerous, dangerous component of global trade. It was still,
it's the weather.
It's right. If you send a covered wagon out with some sorghum and it goes awry, you can kind of trace it, or you can at least, have a guess of what the last tavern was that the caravan passed by. But a ship, as soon as it leaves port,
it's gone, baby.
It's gone not until it reaches its destination, but until it returns to the London dockside and reports that it made its transit to the Ivory Coast and then to Jamaica and then to Florida and then back.
I think it's a common element in folktales at the time. I think the Charles Perrault Beauty and the Beast has something where it's not like the Disney one where the dad's a crackpot inventor. He's like he's a middle-class shipping magnate with 3 beautiful daughters, but then something goes wrong. Like, that's the twist of fate in a lot of folktales of the period is the ships sink. And it gives you a twist at the end. I think maybe in the original Beauty and the Beast, the ships show up and then they all live happily ever after.
Oh, they didn't sink all along.
It's a way to introduce drama because I think there probably was a lot of drama for people biting their nails and standing at the dock.
Don't the king and queen in the movie Frozen die in a shipwreck?
That's
there's
true.
A lot of dying in shipwrecks.
Or the fan theory is that they become the parents in Tarzan. They wash ashore in Africa.
Oh.
And actually have a separate baby who is raised by apes.
How clever.
That is disproven by Frozen 2. Let me keep up with the Disney conspiracy theories for you.
Well, along the way, Lloyd realized that his real business was in facilitating shipping insurance. And so the cafe morphed into an office. But it was Lloyd's is not actually an insurance company. Lloyd's is still a syndicate. It's a marketplace where
they're just matchmaking.
Where they're matchmaking.
It's like Uber,
where money comes into Lloyd's, and there's a kind of, a room where it's offered like, here is here's this giant risk. Here's the Exxon Valdez.
Who wants to offer a policy?
Yeah,
what are the terms?
Who wants to jump in on this? And I think as the insurance business grew, some private insurance companies started to have resources that were greater than the sort of the members of the syndicate, and Lloyd started to recognize they were losing out on business opportunities, and so dramatically kind of expanded the list of and the wealth base of the people that were part of the Lloyd syndicate. And, it's obviously one of the largest insurers, but it's really a place of insurance rather than like State Farm, for instance.
And they've gotten pretty far on their name, Lloyd's of London. It's classy. Nice. It's alliterative.
It's like Ken Jennings.
It doesn't have farm in the name, which I think is a problem with a lot of insurance companies today.
State Farm.
Do you really want a farmer insuring your car?
One of the things that made Lloyd's of London's reputation was after the San Francisco earthquake. Here in the U.S., because the earthquake destroyed a lot of San Francisco. But
seems like that would be very bad for there.
Well, really, it was 80% of the damage of the San Francisco earthquake was the fires. And so in the aftermath of the in the aftermath of the destruction of the earthquake and the fires, a lot of insurance companies tried to renege on fulfilling their policy, because if you had earthquake insurance but your house burned down, the insurance company could say, well, it wasn't an earthquake that destroyed your house, it was a fire, and vice versa.
Asterisk.
Right? If you had fire insurance, it was like, well, wasn't it really an earthquake?
Luckily, insurance companies never look for a way to get out of stuff that today.
But Lloyd's, crucially in that moment, under the leadership of one of their kind of like head underwriters, a man by the name of Cuthbert Heath.
Wow.
There's a lot of ths in there.
That's hard to say.
Cuthbert Heath.
No, you just said Cutbirth.
Well, it is Cuthbert. Sorry. Cuthbert Heath.
Cutbirth is like the umbilical cord.
Right. No, Cuthbert Heath
I just want to hear you try to say Cuthbert Heath somewhere.
Cuthbert Heath.
Cuthbert Heath.
Cuthbert Heath
Has a speech impediment.
said to Lloyd's that we are going to honor our insurance policies. Or he went to San Francisco and said we're going to honor our policies regardless of what loophole it is that we could use to get out of paying this off. And in doing so, almost, I think, bankrupt the syndicate, but also made the name of Lloyd's, that this was a company you could trust.
These guys are the unimpeachable ones.
That's right. They are going to...
Do you think that's what Cuthbert Heath had in mind?
It is.
He was like, this is our chance to be... It was a branding decision more than anything else?
It was. I mean, I think he probably had he probably had a pretty starched collar just by his name, and believed that there was that there was honor in this.
And what was his name again?
Cuthbert Heath.
There you go.
But also in the aftermath, there was an awful lot of work done to make sure that policies included fire and earthquake. I mean,
I bet there was a lot of fraud too. Like a lot of people after the San Francisco earthquake, a lot of people are like, well, that's where the marble fireplace was.
Right.
And
all of Mom's China was broken in the earthquake. The problem with the problems that arose in insurance later that we I think see quite often now are some of the same ones that arose in banking, and in particular in a scheme that's sort of I guess described as reinsurance, which is that insurance companies once they take on all the liability risk of having insured all these people, want to spread that risk around themselves.
Who insures the insurance agent?
That's right. And so insurance companies started to buy insurance in one another's risk. And this is a
big mega syndicate, basically.
Yeah, this is a good idea until you start to get into a thing that we saw also in the mortgage crisis, which is that
if one person is insuring wrong,
right, insurers
it can collapse the whole industry.
Are insuring insurance on the strength of their insurance, and you get a kind of a risk of spiral loss,
insureception,
where insurance agencies don't know how at risk they are, how many of their policies are predicated on other policies, and we saw this first kind of became a major issue when do you remember the Piper Alpha explosion? There was a North Sea oil rig in the late 80s that blew up in the North Sea, caught on fire, and big explosion. And it was a massive loss, but it spiraled out of control within the insurance industry because there had been so much of this sort of buying and rebuying of risk that it turned out it echoed throughout the whole insurance agency and threatened to be like a market destroyer.
Yeah.
And then later in the 90s, and this was a thing, and this may end up being an omnibus episode, the fallout from the kind of final acknowledgement that asbestos was a instigator of disease.
So all these health claims were actually valid in one fell swoop.
Right. After years and years of companies saying, well, we don't know if asbestos or what, Steve McQueen might have died from too many cigarettes. It ended up that there was a kind of, a long tail of all these worker compensation contracts and policies that had been issued over the course of, decades and decades, all coming home to roost at once. And it was another example of where reinsurance and the spiral losses, kind of threatened to derail the insurance industry as like a megalithic kind of bank.
But today, governments just take it on the chin and bail out the insurers and the reinsurers.
Yeah, that's right. Like all of these things, these major insurance companies are too big to fail, because if they did, it would betray the sham architecture at the heart of all global capitalism. And nobody wants to open that door.
And of the idea of insurance in particular, right? Like what they're selling you is peace of mind. And as soon as it's clear that something went wrong and 100,000 people did not get their peace of mind, who's going to buy that product?
Yeah, right. Who's going to rebuy it? I mean, as soon as we went off of the gold standard and money became just a completely fictional sort of concept, right? As soon as money became fake,
math was a mistake.
Then
basically.
Insurance became fake. Like it's all just a birthday cake.
Yeah, math was a mistake. Yeah. As long as you can see the stuff being traded and stroke your chin and say deal, the second you've got to bust out equations, that's when you can really start ruining a system.
Well, if you're taking 5% of somebody's grain shipment in order to offset the risk of having paid for their barrel of lime juice to keep them from getting scurvy, I can kind of see like, yeah, that seems to be working. But if you are taking 5% of a transaction where someone took 5% of a transaction of someone else's 5% of a transaction, and it's 5% of transactions all the way down, you do get into the world we're living in now, where money is being concentrated in incredible amounts in tiny little small quadrants where you look at the people involved and go, what do you do? What do you do for a living?
I hope you work. Do you work 100,000 times harder than your employees? I hope so, because that's what you've got.
What they're doing is sitting on an apple crate across the Ponte Vecchio, thumbing their nose at Pope Gregory IX.
And probably deciding to run for president. And that concludes Genoan Insurance. Entry number 522.MT0634. Certificate number 46598 in the omnibus. Future links, we hope that social media does not exist in your lifetime, but it sure did in ours, and you can find the records of that in, I'm sure, the university-sized archives that exist of Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. We were at Omnibus Project and individually at Ken Jennings and at John Roderick. Our listeners were the Futurelings on Facebook and also on Discord and Reddit. We received all manner of delightful objects through our mailing address at P.O. Box 55744, Shoreline, Washington, 98155. For example, John, I just discovered that Krista Dahlstrom, whose streaking entry we added to the omnibus last week, discovered a collection of depressing motel and motor lodge postcards in her parents' Minnesota closet. Oh no, it's her own as a kid from mid-century American road trips, and so she sent us the most depressing motel postcards she could find, and they're really fantastic.
This is our benefactor, and she sent this before we did that episode. We just didn't find it. Is that right?
Yeah, I didn't realize. I pulled these out, and we're like, oh, hey, that's the same number as the woman who wanted us to talk about streaking.
How awesome!
So apparently, something about staying in these depressing motels as a child made her very interested in streaking. We also received 2 pads of Playboy magazine office desk notes.
Cool.
With the monogram of someone who never ended up working for the company.
What's all that stuff written on them?
Oh, this is the first page is just a note explaining the 2 blank pages attached. Don't say the name of the would-be employee. I don't want to get sued. We don't have insurance.
Oh, but so this person did not actually end up working at Playboy?
Never in fact hired for the magazine.
But
they had already ordered the pads.
Is this someone we know? Is this our correspondent?
No, it's another employee who sent us these. But, luckily the would-be employee's name is John. So you can just scratch out his surname and these can be your
Right.
your own Playboy pads.
I wonder how to do that and make it not look dumb. But it's something I'm willing to try.
Somebody crocheted us baby Yodas. And I'm not sure who. I can't find the note. If you crocheted us the baby Yodas, though, thank you. These are
They're
delightful.
beautiful.
And yeah, John's daughter has already absconded with one of them. If you would like to send virtual communication, just to say hi, you can do that at theomnibusproject@gmail.com. If you would like to support the show with legal tender, with the illusion that is money, the modern capitalist construct, instead of by crocheting baby Yodas, please get that money to us before our modern banking system collapses. You can support the show at patreon.com/omnibusproject and get a variety of wonderful rewards, including at the $5 level, a free monthly episode in which we add new updates and corrections to past omnibus entries.
Wouldn't that be neat?
It's really, they're fun.
They are.
We like those because we don't have to do as much research.
That's nice. Or at least, we have to do research that we just don't have to think up the original idea.
We just have to research our own mail. We have to do a groundbreaking investigation of our own inbox.
Futurelings, from our vantage point in your distant past, we have no idea how long our civilization survived. It almost certainly came to a cataclysmic end as the result of people not being adequately insured.
Nobody had meteor insurance.
Someone named someone else because they were listed on a Playboy magazine pad, and that person sued, and the people that they sued were not sufficiently insured, and their bankruptcies reverberated throughout their own culture, and pretty soon it was a massive insurance and banking collapse. Fires, people running in the streets, dogs and cats.
What started the fires?
Sleeping together. Hysteria. Hysteria is what starts fires.
When you're really hysterical, do you start fires?
Absolutely.
That's a real peek inside your troubled mind.
I ain't no fire starter. I'm fierce. We hope and pray that this catastrophe never comes because it sounds terrible. But if the worst comes soon, this recording, like all our recordings, may have been our final word.
It sounds terrible. Like many catastrophes, it sounds terrible.
This one does not sound good at all. But if Providence allows, and by Providence I mean the Providence Insurance Company, Providence Heart and Farm Insurance Company of Providence, Rhode Island, we hope to be back with you soon for another entry in the Omnibus.